Chris, were there any sort of key lessons that you sort of learned?
It's definitely, I mean, I think with small organizations, you really have to do your due diligence on the type that you're going to be going in to work with to understand how that dynamic's going to work.
How the economics presented themselves. So comparing like traditional scheme, comparing to 14 units, comparing to Modulus doing 14 units. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
I can say this as straight as I'm going to say it, which is offsite construction will never be better than traditional on the first project you do. So anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something.
So in your view, is there any material of the future in terms of MMCs or industrial construction techniques?
It will be a hybrid. So I think what you'll get, and I think we are seeing a trend with some of the outcomes from the Building Safety Act about how much more clients now need to be versed in what the asset they're creating and what they're doing.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks and Bytes podcast. If you're a founder, construction tech enthusiast, or responsible for innovation in your company, looking for exclusive insights and content not found anywhere else, you won't want to miss our newsletter. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get cutting-edge material delivered straight to your inbox. Last week, we explored the winning business models of robotics in construction, as well as what investors look for when investing in robotics companies. These insights are straight from some of the most successful robotics founders and investors in the space. And now time for the episode. How do you burn £10 million of funding in just 15 months? This extraordinary episode takes us through the downfall of Modulus. Chris Spiceley, ex-client accounts director, gives us an inside view into the events leading up to Modulus' remarkable collapse. We'll dive into what led to the downfall as well as what lessons can be learnt from the wider industry. This episode is absolutely jam-packed with wisdom, so buckle up and enjoy. And now an announcement from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Shft, helping contractors like you leverage BIM to secure the leading position in the race towards construction's digital future. Visit maketheshft.digital for more. This episode is also brought to you by Build Vision, transforming construction supply chain by bringing contractors, manufacturers, and stakeholders onto a single software platform. Visit buildvision.io to find out more. All right, Chris. So, interesting journey so far. So you've worked in various construction delivery roles, project management, and a program and delivery director for some big companies like Mace and Ledley. So you obviously went from a very traditional, or in inverted commas, traditional role into a more tech-focused role. So, how did that all happen?
Well, I think probably in common with a lot of, sort of people that you've interviewed previously, that I've seen on the podcast and in this industry, you meet people who are doing stuff, and this industry is about contacts, relationships, as we know, and they're doing something interesting and it tweaks your interest. So where my interest, where it's, if you like, diverged away from a more traditional role, was an architect I knew, had known for many years, Richard Hyams at A Studio. He was doing some interesting stuff in trying to get an offsite company going to deliver housing. And he was the first one that really sort of brought my attention, because up until then, I'd mainly been doing sort of education projects whilst I was at Lend-Lease, whilst I was at Mace. And then at Lend-Lease had got more involved in some residential stuff, because it was about how a residential development could generate a capital receipt to redo a school or redo a healthcare facility or some voluntary facilities. So it was really Richard that sort of like tweaked my interest initially with what potentially could be achieved by offsite.
And when was it? What year was it, more or less?
So that was probably 2016, 2017. Okay. So he was very much at that time looking at sort of light gauge steel offsite construction in order to provide a faster, better quality way of delivering low-rise housing, or certainly below 7 meters, below 18 meters, below 7 stories, and that's what he was trying to set out to do. And that really, from there, sort of fired a an interest in me to get more involved in this and understand more, because at that time I was relatively ignorant of it. We were starting to see things coming through to challenge traditional ways of delivery. Engineered timber was obviously starting to really start to ratchet up on things like school buildings, etc. And I'd seen some of that in Lend-Lease, who had been big champions of that. And then you started to get to know people in the sector. So whether it was, Gary Elliott Wood, or Sadie and Alex at DeWright Marsh Morgan, people who were pushing that envelope. And so that for me was about trying to get to understand where the advantages were and how that was going to help clients that I was working with and help me progress in trying to change this industry that we all love but find endlessly frustrating, and always think there must be a better way of doing this. And that's what you want to do, is continually progress. So for me, it's always been about being introduced by people whose opinion I respect, and seeing where they're going and then following that journey. Sometimes you'll hit a bit of a dead end, whether that's actually, just theoretically, or whether that actually becomes because you spend a couple of years pursuing something and then it doesn't quite go in the direction you want to go. And I think that'll be a feature that comes back in a couple of the things that we discuss in this podcast. But you have to try these things. You have to see if there's something out there that works for you personally, as well as hopefully changing something in this industry.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like you see a lot of people that would have a similar background to you that just sort of stay there, but you were trying to push the boundary a bit.
I suppose it's always horses for courses. Some people like being in big organisations, and there's always pros and cons to any sort of way you're in. Sometimes the smaller setup will just not suit people because of the nervousness that exists around about that, how you can be hand to mouth. So you were probably always trying to find that happy medium, certainly to keep family and other half happy, about regular income alongside the ability to see the potential upside that may come out of it. But sometimes you can achieve that in bigger organizations. And I think we have seen that in how lots of the larger, certainly material suppliers, have got their venture arms. So whether you've got Cemex Ventures, Holcim, all of these people that are trying to look at ways in which they can look at how the industry can progress, but at the same time have that sort of background of the big cash cow of the business behind you that lends that air of stability, and obviously the investment money there as well.
Do you see that in Modular in the UK, Modular offsite MMCs, or maybe starting more broadly, MMCs,
Mark,
then offsite?
Can you just tell people what MMC is?
MMC, modern method of construction. Yeah,
you passed.
So where I was with my question, Owen, now.
I don't know.
So within MMCs or offsite or modular, you mentioned there are like a mother kind of companies that would create the venture arms and just create innovation out of that. So do you see companies in the UK doing similar things, or maybe large contractor and setting up like a MMC shop or offsite shop, trying to facilitate their development with these offsite projects? Does it work?
Well, I think the first thing I'll say as well is that although obviously Owen asked you to define what MMC was, we're actually seeing something emerging over the last couple of months, which is following the House of Lords report about some of the failures in residential, particularly that Homes England had invested in. I think that was one of the catalysts for that report. Is MMC going to be able to deliver the housing that we need to address the shortage? And I think actually the word MMC now is sort of becoming a bit persona non grata. So I think the phrase industrialized construction seems to be the thing that's overtaking it. Now, some people will just raise their eyebrows and go, right, okay, same bad, one. Different phrase. But I think actually some people were railing against the fact that you put modern in front of there, because again, they would say, well, 15 years ago, we had the same cycle. Is offsite construction going to do this? And I think what we have to bear in mind is that, again, and I don't want to keep using the phrase horses for courses, it works for some things, it doesn't work for other things. So let's try and unpack that a bit. So if you look at, say, what people see as almost like the quintessential offsite industrialized construction, I'm going to keep tripping myself up here, is sort of hot rolled volumetric. So basically creating a fish tank out of hot rolled members, trying to fit that out almost as much as you can in a factory off site, delivering that box to site to be craned into position and then sort of fire sealed, cladding done, joined up. So you're basically getting the efficiency and the quality of doing it in a factory, delivering it to site. Now, in certain sectors, let's just say, for example, student accommodation, where the box fits very well, it will still be a very valid way of being able to deliver, because it's all about how quickly can you get that asset operation. So anything that speeds up the program. And so if you can get groundworks and core and then your units in that fast, effective manner, and the bottom line is all about when do you open, because it's then about income into there, fantastic. But the downsides are, for people who are not, say, looking at such a repetitive standardized room typology, is it can create inflexibility. So if you're trying to do a 70 meters squared nationally described space standard compliant apartment, you're probably going to have to use 3 modules in order to create that space. And then, of course, how do you get articulation in the facade? And these are the challenges that people are always trying to travel. And sometimes you just have to acknowledge that the technology you may be trying to deploy, despite the benefits it's showing, it's just too inflexible to meet the requirements of the market. And as we come on to discuss things around Modulus in this, that was one of the reasons for failure, was going down a very narrow field of hard technology, the hard asset technology, the hot rolled volumetric, and it not being flexible enough to adapt to what we know, particularly in the UK, are sites that have all sorts of quirks about them. Narrow entrances, funny ends. How do you optimize the most of that site and use a system which has a lot of rules with it? And sometimes those things are just not going to be compliant. So you have to be ruthless in filtering out what works and what doesn't. And then you get left with a narrow addressable market. And obviously when you're trying to sort of build a global scalable housing thing, all of that, those things really start to clash. And that's, again, where business is getting into trouble. I think, to go on to the point about that, Martin, so it's about fundamentally understanding the sector you're going into and knowing that you've got something in there that can really play to the characteristics of that market. And again, we saw that in Modulus, where we had challenges. Talking to some of the colleagues who were in the American part of the business, they would talk about being able to access sites on all 4 sides, because that's just what they're able to do. Whereas in the UK, we would see that as, wow, that's utopia for us. You show them a picture of what you try to get into on a London site, where you're having to get in.
Oh, hell
no. Sort of like London, like alley access down back of the Mews and stuff like that. It's a non-starter. And I think that's where 2D panelized, whether it be light gauge, timber, whatever, is going to be what works in the residential sector. I am pretty certain hot rolled volumetric will still work in other sectors. Maybe it's the more government public sector markets where they're a lot more prescriptive in terms of standardization. So justice, schools potentially, where it's a 55 meter squared classroom. So you can really work to the parameters that are there and know that there's a decent program pipeline of work that isn't going to vary too much, and you can set yourself up to deliver to that. But with the setbacks that we've had recently on a macro basis, and personally that I've seen, it's going to be a really interesting 12 months. And I think a lot of the industry is waiting to see what happens with the next government, whatever flavour they are, and what that investment is going to be in public sector building and what they see as being able to address the housing shortage.
So many things to unpack, really. So in your view, is there any material of the future? in terms of MMCs or industrial construction techniques? Is it timber? Is it hot roll steel or cold roll, or some sort of printed concrete situation? What do you think? Like, I don't know if you know any stats on how much do we produce right now in any of those particular materials or segments, and what's the future?
Well, I think it is, and it sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer. It will be a hybrid. So I think what you'll get is clients, and I think we are seeing a trend with some of the outcomes from the Building Safety Act about how much more clients now need to be versed in what the asset they're creating and what they're doing. So it's a horrible generalization, but I'm going to say the sort of design and dump method, mentality that existed a lot previously. That's fine. We can pass that off to the D&B contractor to do various parts of, will accept equal substitutions, etc. Now, the team, the client and their advisors, they have to be far more aware of the actual, if you like, the interfaces, the materials and everything that goes into that. And again, I apologize if that sounds like a horrible oversimplification, and actually sounds like I'm denigrating parts of the industry. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to say that you need to go into more depth around these things now, because there is the not inconsiderable threat of having to stand up in a dock and justify why you made certain decisions, because of the consequences, as we know, that come out of that. So what it means is, I think people are really going in and searching now, researching and taking the time to understand what is it that's going to give us the best performance, what improves our productivity, what is it that we can rely on. And I think now we're moving into that era of the specialist contractors. Those people are actually doing the work, taking the risk, and then being involved earlier in the process. And from that, people will make earlier decisions about where they go. They decide that twin wall concrete is absolutely what works for them. Now, we might throw a big question mark up on that and say, surely you can't be using concrete because of its environmental credentials. I get the structural, I get everyone understands where it sits and what you can do. Surely you must consider something else. But it's those rounded discussions that need to be had at the beginning to understand the outcomes that you want to achieve. If your funder's saying, we absolutely cannot get involved in concrete because of X, Y, and Z, because of its environmental credentials, then do you have to go and find some of these emerging concretes that have very low cement ratios, all of that sort of stuff, pay the premium to use it, be a bit of a guinea pig, or do you fall back on something recycled steel, timber, that may meet your requirements at the level? If you're only doing 2 or 3 story housing, why would you not use timber? Because of all the benefits that come with it. I have a natural slight bias because I am involved with a company at the moment that is bringing a timber panelized system to the market, but that's because, in my experience, having gone through everything, from what I've seen, it is the right solution for the market at this particular time because of the benefits that it brings. It can be faster. It has the better environmental credentials. It can be delivered at a price point that matches against traditional. So you're trying to remove all those barriers and hurdles that people put up to why they won't adopt.
Okay, so before we dive into more discussing Modulus and some nitty gritty of what happened there, just wanted to gauge your thoughts on the warranties in the built environment, structural warranties mainly, because I used to work in a structural warranty kind of environment, and the problem I found there that every time there was some interesting solution given by a company from maybe outside of England, maybe from Europe or even from England, it was there was like very big pushback on this, and it was nearly impossible for them to implement these projects on site and then this company to cover it within their warranty. So it's very difficult to innovate if you want to do it for a mass client who can then take a mortgage and warranty. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, for me, it's become one of the biggest cruxes here is about covenant in the background. So if I say, not in the good old days, but in the past, there was the classic white book, which the plasterboard manufacturers used to give you, which was, if you install these details, you're basically, to a degree, covered under warrant and covenant.
Robust
and it's
details,
really,
yeah?
Yes, exactly. Robust details. Yeah, it's exactly that equivalent that we're getting to now. As a client, you have to fundamentally understand and know that what you're putting in is achieving the specific purpose that you've put for it. That it needs to meet the regulations, etc. So it's absolutely about, can you prove how you've gone through that process? So we will naturally see people falling back on the established names that have the covenant. I suppose you're sort of falling a little bit back on, you know, who are you going to end up suing? Well, you sue, as the old golden rule goes, you sue the person that's got the money. So you need to know that they are an organization that has standing and a covenant behind them, and that is the big material suppliers. But what that's moving then to is the criticality of interfaces. And this is something that I've been sort of like looking at a lot in the last 3 to 4 years. It becomes very critical in industrialized construction. Is, yes, you can get someone to come up with their material and their element, but their scope and liability is very well defined as to where it starts and where it stops. And then you have the next piece of the jigsaw, is because, as we know, any construction asset is a complex coming together of all these different interfaces, and it's about getting those interfaces right. And that's again what attracted me to the timber company I'm working with. Is two of the guys that are involved with it, Richard and Kieran down at Easy Space. They've cut their teeth in doing these type of interface deliveries. They started off doing window install. Now, if you see window installers doing it properly in a passive house like type environment, you see the attention and care to detail that goes into creating those details and how it all works to make sure that it's achieving the outcomes that are desired. And that's the sort of quality that we need to ensure is enshrined in how we bring stuff together. How you design those interfaces, how you ensure they perform as they're done, and how it's executed on site, and giving people the time and the space to get those things right.
Okay.
Agree.
So, Chris, somewhere along your path, you were hired by Modulus, and we can just preface this a little bit by saying it's quite an extraordinary story. Because Modulus, so last December, around about December last year, is that right? I think they went into
Correct.
liquidation, and that was just roughly 15 months after raising 10 million pounds Series A fund. And from my personal perspective, what I find quite interesting is usually they weren't a modular company as such. So, and usually the argument is that these companies go or struggle with cash flow because of they're asset heavy, but in this case it was more software based. So maybe we can touch on that. But I would just be interested to know, Chris, how you got involved with Modulus to start with, and perhaps take us on the journey from day one to day whatever it was that things went a bit.
650K a month burn and crashed and burned.
Yeah, I mean, there was a substantial burn that was on there. So, you could, and that is definitely a contributing factor. But I think the ambition that was set out, and that's what attracted me originally. So I was working at Claritas, a contractor, set up initially by John Wardle, who was ex Waits Living. And John's ambition was to have part of the company that would embrace industrialized construction and have a different delivery model with it. So they wouldn't charge overhead and profits on the pre-manufactured value element. So they would say, we're not necessarily adding value to that part as the contractor. We take that part and then we wrap around the rest of it, provide the principal contractor's overview and do that. And now that really attracted me initially, but what it meant was we needed to find the right type of partners to work with who had the potential to grow and scale so that we could grow with them. And that's where the introduction to Modulus for me came from, was could they be a good fit as a partner for Claritas? And from there, as I gained more insight into their model, what they were doing on the software side, how they were developing their systems, it really started to play into my sense of here's something that has the potential to really change this industry, and not just in the UK, but on a global scalable basis. So really what they were trying to do was say, we can change workflows and the effectiveness of how quickly you can get through the early stages of a project, because we are basing it on a system or a series of systems that mean that the information you're working with is not just forecasts or guesstimates based on historic data. It is actually the model that can be delivered. So sometimes I try and explain it by thinking of it a bit like a bow tie. So bear with me on this one. The knot in the middle is planning. You can't avoid it. You just have to get in there somehow. But on the one side of the bow tie, you've got all of these parameters that you're having to juggle together, whether it's ground conditions, the site constraints, all the different systems that are in there, and you have to go through multiple iterations, consultation, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, to pull all this together to come up with a application, a proposal that is going to get through planning. And then you go through that knot, you come out the other side, and you've basically challenged with now you've got to actually deliver it. So what Modulus was trying to do was basically streamline how you got through that first part.
I really like it, actually. I really like the analogy.
Not avoid planning, but I'll come back to planning in a minute. And then out the other side, if nothing's really changed in planning, you got your reserve matters application, it says you need to provide this information, but the essence of the system has stayed the same. Why would it have changed? Then you can move to manufacturing and delivery in a shorter scale of time because all the information is already there. So that was the essence of what they were trying to do. But at the same time, come up with that approach for residential that could be applied globally. Now, when you look at all of those factors, now they were set on trying to do this in the UK first. There may have been, some earmarks raised around that, but that's where the majority of the founders were from. And then scale that and grow it elsewhere. Now, the timing could have been very good because Brexit had only just happened. So technical regs, commonality between the UK and Europe are still pretty close, but over time they will start to diverge. And obviously they saw an opportunity to also take on the States because some very good people became available when Katera floundered. So they decided to have a look at that as well. They took on too much.
Yeah.
It's a huge subject area to cover, and you needed to be more focused. And I think that was probably one of the biggest issues to do with it, was the range of what you were trying to cover, and the talent that you needed to cover that meant that you ended up with, most people would come in and look at it. And I have to say, when I started in October 22, some discussions around recruitment, where we were roughly about 30-40 staff. Within a couple of weeks of me joining, I'm sort of going on a site visit and I'm being introduced to 2 or 3 new people who've also started at that same time. So suddenly you're just seeing grow and grow and grow, and you're going, we're pre-income and we're pre-starter.
Did you have any clients or not at all? Did you do any?
No, so no fee-paying clients, so no revenue income. But obviously we were working with some of the investors, such as Regal London, to then progress solutions specifically for projects or pipeline that they may have had. And at the same time, one of my roles was to go out there and find more clients to bring together. So, yeah, that's what I was there to do.
So you mentioned a few things, maybe perhaps too fast a growth and taking on too much. So what I heard from the story was that Modulus was based in the UK, and then it got this shiny, or should we say a carrot dangled in front of it about expanding to the US, but perhaps that was a little bit too premature in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, there's hindsight and post-rationalization that can go on, and I wasn't in the firm for the arguments and discussions at that time, but there was a big salary drag that came with the team with America. So again, that is going going to hurt, and it could have extended the runway for the business if you hadn't had that. It was acknowledged that America was always going to be, great from a point of view of a market if you can get it. But when you start talking to, the colleagues in America, who a lot of us really enjoyed working with because of the way they challenged us in terms of their work effort, attitude, that sort of can-do American sort of attitude, which can clash a little bit sometimes with the way the UK goes about it. We can unpack that a bit later on. But generally, just sort of when you get to understand how different each state can be in America, seismic as well. So having to potentially deal with that, termites in the southern states, whether that was going to be an issue for us or not, but then how you can, so lots of different challenges that exist out there that we just don't have over here. And so the business getting distracted into doing things. I think also to go with that, the fact that in developing a software tool alongside a hardware tool, again, where's the focus?
Yeah.
Yo-yoing between the two of you absolutely need this, but is that just proof of concept in order to say we have a system that we can ingest into the digital tool, and actually we just want to be agnostic? Because actually, does it matter if it's a timber system, a hot rolled system, or whatever? But then, where do you get more revenue? Is it SaaS sales on the software side, or is it actually project income because you're delivering your developed hard model out into the market and you're getting solid income off that? So again, that distraction or that lack of focus with a large team can be really detrimental to you actually achieving your objectives.
So where you focused on, within Modulus, where you focused on software and delivery, so the manufacturing part of it as well?
So it was both. So the software side was being developed by that team with subject matter experts helping shape it in terms of the outcomes that it needed to achieve in order to, but it was based on the hard system being ingested into it and then brought to life using that software tool. And I would say that, the software tool with some further investment and a better adoption by some organizations to start off with could have had a good chance of success. But what I've been amazed about in the last 9 to 12 months is how much tools are developing in the market, particularly sort of, AI developed tools to actually start to bring to life some of those things that the tool Tessa was going to do anyway, and the ability to do that. So you had a large software development team working on this when actually the market outside may have been starting to come up with answers a lot faster.
Oh, wow, that's ridiculous. Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
But I'm, again, probably being horribly oversimplistic because that software team moved heaven and earth to develop things over a short period of time, and bearing in mind that they're having to be able to create a tool from scratch that can take any site, redline it, and then drop an object onto it that absolutely meets all the needs of building regs, obeys gravity, all of these quite difficult things to bring together. So they achieved some monumental things over that period, but the market was moving faster, and also how quickly can you respond to different client potential customer requirements when you're dealing with something like housing, which has so much breadth to it.
Yes. So did you do any pilots, like any pilot projects that have been completed?
So of the physical product?
Yes.
Yeah, so there was one scheme that was going. So there was a showroom, which was a 1-bed, 50-meter squared apartment that was delivered down at Knauf's factory down in Kent. So that was done as a demonstrator of what could be achieved. And then they were in the process of delivering a 14-unit apartment scheme with Bristol City Council.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
On the Bristol Housing Festival sites down there. So that was the project that was starting to go through. Now, the story that, and I was only cursory involved on that by hearing sort of feedback, but it wasn't the best managed project, should we say. Design was delayed for a number of reasons. Some of it client side, some of it internal to ourselves, some of it to do with supply chain. And actually, you started to see some of the behaviors that exist in a startup. We have to call ourselves what we were, a startup. You see how some of those behaviors start to trump what are just good commercial behaviors elsewhere. So the imperative to get things done in order to make sure that you're in a position to get the next tranche of funding, or to prove that to your existing investors that you're spending their money well. Why is that not there? Right, okay, well, because of X, Y, and Z. And then the message that goes back internally is you get it there, you get it done now. Oh, but we haven't set up the subcontract because we haven't got the design information or the right schedule in place. Don't care, get it done. It's that type of mentality that starts to change things. Then when the product turns up, let's just use a example that I'll think of just off the top of my head, but I think we all know that that's not quite the case, is wall panels turn up, they're not square. Are we sending them back to the supplier to get them redone? No, we're not doing that.
No, we need more funding.
Yeah, we're going to refix them on site because we need the investor to come around to have a look and see that it's all there. So you're then asking the assembler to correct on site. The assembler's going, well, you do know that's going to charge a lot as a day rate to do this because it's outside the original scope agreed. Don't care, get it done. Money, 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 money.
Jeez, this is significant.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
And that's on a small scale. So you're having to solve a lot of the issues as you're going through. But at the same time, how are you going to learn the lessons out of this to then say, let's make sure we don't do any of that again, and let's make sure that we set it up right next time. And that constant balance between it is a really difficult thing to do. And in hindsight, I don't envy the task that anyone in Modulus had in order to try and to do that. I think, you can argue some people will square pegs in round holes. A 14-unit scheme in Bristol needs someone like a contracts manager who's down there, boots on the ground, working on it, doing it. You don't need people that have dealt with much bigger projects and have a bit more of a client-side mentality. You want someone who's done that type of scheme and can walk the walk. And also, you don't need supply chain and logistics experts that have maybe worked for Diageo or Unilever. You need someone who understands the commercial imperative of a subcontract agreement that's locked down, whereby if someone doesn't do what they're going to do, you go after them. Now, as I'm even saying that, I hate myself for saying it because of the behaviours that exist in this industry, but that's the reality of what you have to deal with.
Play the game.
And I think that dichotomy in Modulus's behavior was trying to prove things on a small scale whilst trying to demonstrate how you're going to become this global unicorn. That's schizophrenic behavior that you really start to struggle with. And apologies if I've used some phrases there that sort of counter each other, but I think at the essence, that's really where a lot of the trouble existed, was those behaviors that start to change how you know that you shouldn't be doing that, but you're being forced or told or ordered to do it. And then you start to get unenthused, unengaged, and you realize that you're starting to get into trouble. And I think that's probably going back to one of the earlier points you guys raised about why on the outside did it seem, like nice progressions, but ultimately there was trouble at the heart. And a lot of the next tier of management outside the founders had tried in various different ways to get changes of direction. And I think there's some honest people in there who were saying, if I'm part of the problem, get rid of me. If I'm not needed now, because my skill set is not here. Let's part our ways because we want to see this succeed, but I don't want to be an impediment. I don't want to be a drag. And I think the founders and the board didn't take some of the hard decisions. And that's some of the stuff that you think needs to be done. You know, if you're 60 staff, but going back down to 25 or 30 staff, focusing on a few core things at a time that extends the runway by another 12 months, do it. Absolutely do it. But again, that's the beauty of hindsight.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, was it just, could we pin this down maybe to one thing then? Or do you think it is like a combination of multiple things that just escalated and blew up?
I don't think there's one thing.
Yeah,
maybe founders' mentality kind of.
Well, I'm seeing like their role, the pressure to continuously raise funding, and like treating it more like a startup as opposed to an actual construction company because of that pressure from external investors.
Yeah, show off.
Well, there may be an argument to say, how involved were the investors in keeping on top of stuff to actually be able to do this, and how honest were the founders being with the investors about that if they're not so closely involved day to day. I think if you're post-rationalizing, it is always going to be a multitude of things. But if you were trying to draw a consistent theme through this, I think it would be not listening enough to the advice that you're being given by the team on the ground that are saying you need to do things differently. You need to take some hard decisions. So take those hard decisions, because what I've seen, not just in Modulus, but in other companies, founders stay so sort of like slaven to the original vision of what they did. And I can get that because investors invested in that original vision. But I think you can see that people pivot over time, to use a much hackneyed phrase, in order to respond to the challenges that get thrown at them. And although real estate and construction may not be the most dynamic market, when you got economic headwinds of the type that we faced in the UK, you have to take some hard decisions, and I just think those decisions were not taken at the right time. So if I was ever going to look for one thing, it would be, I'd say, the ego of some of the founders initially, and then the lack of decision making thereafter. If they carried on in an egotistic way and said, right, this is absolutely what I'm going to do, and cut, I don't think a lot of us as staff who have suffered out of this, would have a complaint, because we said we understand that business has now gone on because it took some hard decisions. And although I suffered at the time by being let go, being asked to leave, whatever, if that business is still there, then they took the right decision for the people that were there. And you have to be honest about that.
Yeah, fair. Chris, I just wanted to ask about this scheme in Bristol you mentioned earlier. I'm just very curious on the economics of the whole idea that Modulus had, and you might or might not have information on this. How the economics presented themselves? So comparing like traditional scheme, comparing to 14 units, comparing to Modulus doing 14 units. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think with a period of reflection, I can say this as straight as I'm going to say it, which is offsite construction will never be cheaper than traditional on the first project you do. Mm-hmm. So anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something. So let's be clear on that. Absolutely. I think what you can see
I can see the conviction.
Yeah. Well, what you can see from people, for example, like Tide Vision, I'll come back to the Bristol scheme in a minute, but just to emphasize that point, is what Tide Vision do is they roll the same team. So they tend to use same engineers, same HTA, same internal team to move from project to project. So they have incrementally improved as they go through. There'll be variations in the project, but they incrementally improve. So I would say, over time, they are going to get far more effective delivery because of the efficiencies they're pulling through in that manner. But on the first one, you're going to struggle to do it. And we could see that was going to go. So it was not going to be comparable on a pure cost per meter squared or whatever equivalent was going to be done on that. There was a view that it could be delivered quicker, but there was a lot of changes in terms of design, etc. That just meant that you were losing some of those efficiencies. And then also with the amount of adaptations that were going to have to happen in the assembly and then the install, you were not going to struggle. You were really going to struggle to see any cost efficiency there. But I applaud Bristol in the first instance for taking the initiative to try these things, which a lot of people are not doing. Learn the lessons, then you're better off for the next time that we're there. So I think, if you were taking how Bristol was likely to outcome, because remember that job is not happening now, so that's fallen. I don't think it was going to be a pretty comparison, Martin, in terms of cost per meter squared for doing it trad versus what it was going to be for the Modulus delivery of Offsite. But having said
Such a
that,
costly lesson.
absolutely, for Bristol and for obviously creditors, trade creditors involved in the supply chain, who inevitably are the people that get hit the most on this.
Yeah, Chris, was there? Do you know what happened to the software? Because I'm assuming that was quite a large part of intellectual property.
Yeah. So the last I heard, was a company that were acting as the administrators with the view in the first place, then the liquidators when they were appointed finally, was that it was put into a data room for people to come around and basically have a look at and see, is it an asset that I'm worth paying for. So all of the assets of Modulus would have been put in that data room for people to have a look at. So if you need some nice table and chairs, go and have a look. But the software was in there as well. So various people wanted to have a look at it, pored over it. I think the thing is that, and more qualified people than me have, sort of validated some of these things. Even though, there was a very, very competent coding team working on it, there are idiosyncrasies that get put in by the people who are coding. So you need an element of that team that developed it for you to understand it, because you may be then balancing, if you were ever looking at it, to go, do I spend 4 months unpicking this to understand it all, to then know that I've got something of value here if I've taken an initial investment decision? And if I've got the team on board, great, maybe I can do that quite quickly. Or do I just stand up my own team from 4 to 6 months based on the same brief that I get it? And I see an interesting dynamic there, because, there are some players in the market, a company called, actually I won't name them because you probably told me a little bit in confidence, but, they use development teams from other parts of the world, which will cost them a fraction of the price of having a full-time equivalent in the UK. But they make sure that the brief and the output's constantly managed and stuff. So they are delivering similar levels of code and performance for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
Now, pros and cons with both approach, but, if you've got a runway and you need to develop stuff, how do you go about it? And I think that would be a lesson I would take away from constantly comparing how you do it with both of those approaches. Having FTE sitting there, constantly keeping them motivated. And don't get me wrong, Co, who ran the software team, ran it superbly. But I think she was let down by some of the management and the outcomes, and ultimately what the software was supposed to do, by it not necessarily being that compatible with the market it was trying to serve.
Yeah. So I got 2 more questions on this point, and one was during like let's say the run up to the
cataclysmic
like that event.
Yeah.
for some hyperbole, why not? It's just shame I can't pronounce it.
Shame I have to show you how to pronounce it.
That is a real shame. Damages my ego. Yeah, was there any, like, how was it obvious that it was gonna go? Like, you hear these stories of Twitter and Tesla, the employee logs in one morning and it's like, oh, login doesn't work, or you've been sacked or whatever it might say on there. Was it like that?
Well, going back to one of the earlier points about ego, there was let's say, a narrative given by those people that were involved in getting the next fundraising, that there was going to be a white knight coming. Now, I can be honest enough to say that the alarm bell rang for me massively when a major tier one contractor that we were trying to close a deal for, to take the software, ultimately potentially look at alternative methods of hard asset delivery. So not necessarily our hot roll volumetric, in fact, actually probably something quite different, but actually really interested in how the software could give you immediate answers to resolve sites based on proven systems with all of the attendant information that comes with it. They loved it, and really saw it as being the essence of how they could deliver game-changing outcomes for their potential clients. In the conversation about how much they were likely to spend with us, it becoming a relatively large number, the decision turned to, could they maybe invest in the company instead? And of course, my answer would be, well, I need to introduce you then to the people at the company that can deal with that. But, with the slight caveat that they said, look, we're a contractor. We have a part of the business that looks at investments in this way. They don't move at pace. So it would be a good 9 to 12 months off, before you were likely to see any fruition on these discussions. You go, great. Obviously, I was out there to try and secure fee income. So I'm saying, well, that's great. Rather than it being investment, it will be fee income. So I'm doing my job. And then introducing potential investor works in a good way as well. But I was then a bit horrified to see a list of potential investors that was then going into a board paper that said that one was a very good prospect. When I'm going, but it's got no relevance to the funding challenge we have now because it's a long way off. They're not moving. They're not that type of organization. So then you start to question other names that are on that list by going, well, maybe I should pay more attention to that.
Yeah. I think it's called being delusional a little bit.
Well, I think you get caught up in it because you're going through those cycles of doing it. And delusional could be one word for it. And I'm absolutely sure there are old colleagues of mine that would say that is the right phrase. I would, and maybe it's my downfall, but I would tend to like to think it was being done with the best intentions, but actually those best intentions should be pushed down to say the best thing you can do is be honest with the staff so that people can make informed decisions. And that was sorely lacking. You needed to be honest with the staff and say, we are relying on a Hail Mary to come in and save this company. Now, I know that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as you say that, everyone starts to jump ship. But ultimately, that may start to provide a solution for you anyway, which is extending allowing for notice periods and whatever. But if people are leaving, it can work the other way around. And maybe you become more investable by doing that. But these are the conundrums that they have to deal with. And as I say, I wasn't privy to all of those discussions, but that's when alarm bells started ringing. And, there were people who were working right up until the last minute. The software team were still going hell for leather to get the next release, get the next updates going and get going. So absolute testimony to those type of people for still doing that, even knowing that there is something lurking right behind them. And similarly, I was still trying to get a client over the line and being asked some pointed questions about them. But we were being open that we were pre-income and that we needed this funding in order to get into the next level.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned staff, about being honest with staff. I did read a article that suggested that a number of the staff had not received salaries and final salaries and that kind of thing. Was that the case? And two, if you're comfortable to speak about it, of course, how did it personally affect you?
So if I do my personal one first, and then say that a lot of the other staff are sort of variations on that theme as to where they ended up. Because obviously I don't know every individual person's circumstances as regards that. So we were not paid salary in August. So that was held. September payment was made, but the investor obviously took some conditions and stuff with that. We were then not paid October. So when the company failed November, I think that I've got my months right there. Basically, I was owed 2 months' salary from that position. So obviously, I'd been there less than 2 years, sort of notice periods, holidays, and all that sort of stuff. So basically, missed out on all of that. With it going into liquidation, with no buyer coming in for any of the assets, there not being enough money in the bank, all of that sort of stuff. Even though staff ranked quite high, basically you ended up getting government statutory minimum. So effectively, I've ended up getting basically roundabout 2/3 of my August salary back, and that's it. So no expenses, no nothing. And then people will be variations on a theme.
And that's
But,
it.
Yep, that's it.
Just like tough shit.
Yep, done.
Oh wow.
Gone.
Yeah.
Now,
it's interesting.
So, but add into the personal circumstances of a couple of the stories, which I don't think a few of the people will mind me telling them, is, and this is, I have to be very careful here. It is, you are legally able to do this, which is obviously take from pension amounts of certain months as long as you're paying back over a period. Now, I want to check the wording on that. But some of people have missed out on pension payments. So that goes double whammy for them in terms of what they've done. And then also some people were on working visas who suddenly, if the company falls away without you being honest enough ahead of it, suddenly they're left with, you've got X period to basically sort your affairs out, or you're going to be leaving. Now, that for me is the stuff about being honest with staff.
Yes.
That is unforgivable.
Yes, I agree.
Some of us are big enough, ugly enough, old enough to ask ourselves questions, deal with the family. Others are effectively looking at whatever the window is. Let's just say it's 3 months, sort out your affairs, or you're having to leave the country.
Yeah, I think that. Sorry, go on.
No, for me, that's the unforgivable bit.
Yeah, I agree. I run a small team of 7 people, including me, and like what you said is a complete sign of like dishonesty, delusion, and incompetence, even to a degree, I think, because they probably had a dream of something, but without touching the reality. So this dream was just a dream, and kind of I struggle to really, I'm not a founder, but I run a small business, right, within construction as well. So you kind of come to similar problems. So you just need to like think ahead and make sure that you have a scenario for the worst case scenario that might happen 2, 3, 4 months from now, right? So that's what I can say.
The one bit I would stress on that is, obviously, I wasn't a founder of the business, and I'm not privy to lots of discussions that have gone on. This is my view from what I saw, and that some colleagues have been happy to share with me as regards their experiences. But those are the sort of things that I think really stick in the throat for a few people in terms of the experiences that they had to go through, and they were very avoidable, in my view.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try and touch on a positive or like some hard lessons for people. Chris, are there any sort of key lessons that you sort of learned, maybe how they shape you moving forward, and even some advice for people that are like trying to build startups within construction technology? I mean, there's a shit ton to unpack based on what you said, but anything that sticks with you?
It's definitely, I think with small organizations, you really have to do your due diligence on the type of people that you're going to be going in to work with, to understand how that dynamic's going to work. And that may sound like a very obvious one to say, but sometimes I might say I probably haven't necessarily done that myself to the degree of fundamentally understanding what I was getting into. So you do get that sort of period after, I suppose beyond the honeymoon period, 100 days, 3 months to 6 months, where you're going, ooh, what the hell have I let myself in for? But then you take a decision about, I'm here for the ride, so I'll learn stuff on it to come out. the other side. So I suppose that would be to people really do your work to understand who you're going to be working with, what you're getting yourself into, as much as you can. Take those references around. And there will be one actually, when I was interviewed, sorry, just picking up on an earlier question you said, Owen, when I was interviewed, one guy did actually, and I'll always be eternally grateful to him because it did raise one question mark with me. He just said, "Are you sure you want to join here?" That's in my interview process. Now, you might say that paints me to be a complete idiot, because if I got that warning in an interview process, we go there. But I'll buy him a pint at some stage to thank him for that. I think one of the themes that we touched on is about, and one of the the sort of questions that you guys said that you're quite interested in, was industrialized construction obviously has suffered a lot, certainly in the UK, but obviously in some context globally as well, in terms of highlighted failures. I think you guys were right in some of your prompts to me about, is this a macro failure, or is this a micro failure? And again, I think it's always a mixture of the two. You can look at some of the business models of some of those people and say, some of them have relied too much on trying to find their own land in order to generate demand for the factory, and that was always going to struggle.
Yeah, that's ridiculous, actually.
Because you're competing against a very well-known constraint that's out there. And is your factory geared exactly to the right sort of flow of demand that you're going to have? I mean, trying to square that circle, you're a better man than I, Gunga Din, if you can do that type stuff. I think the capital investment that has to go into a housing factory is huge. And I think some of them should have concentrated on other sectors first to prove it and build it. And I think some of the players that still exist have done that, whether it's a Reds 10, whether it's a Premier Modular, those type of people that concentrate, Algeco, they tend to have a blend, whether it's a lease and a permanent parts of the business. One generates a lot of cash. The other means that they can start to evolve and build what they want, where they have a blend of public and private sector. So when one sector drops, they have stuff to fill in. So Algeco seems to do it quite well in terms of fast food retail, as well as healthcare, as well as other things. So I think you have to have that sort of blend. But really what it needs is that demand. It absolutely has to be that demand. Ones that have been successful in the past have based it on things like Ministry of Justice, defence accommodation, where they've seen 3 or 4 years and a client that really sort of engages, so you can gear what you're manufacturing up to deliver that. The one example I've heard of was what Baclock were trying to do, or what they had successfully done in other jurisdictions. So where they'd set up contract manufacturing with their timber manufacturer, where they said, we will buy 200 widgets off you each year, irrespective of how many we actually consume. So if we can only take 150 because of certain issues on site, we'll still pay you for the 50, or we'll take delivery of the 50 and then work out how we're going to feed them in. Because that enables the manufacturer to gear themselves to roll out 200 a year, 4 a week, nice flat, set up all your material buying arrangements. You can set up the factory to deliver as effective, rather than having to take the peaks and troughs. And now that's something that I would say anyone needs to really get into, is understand how you're going to do that manufacturing successfully, given the demand. People can set up factories, but you've just got to make sure that demand is there in an equal way that enables you to get your business plan set up accordingly. And investors need to really do that work to understand that the shiny unicorn that's out there that potentially can be done is actually able to be delivered in that physical way, because a lot of money's gone into these things based on assumptions that were proven by the market just not to be correct.
Yeah. So in theory, in the UK at least, in theory, we have the demand by that saying we have this 300,000 houses a year of shortage that we need to produce. So the demand in theory would be there, but then the whole planning process and the complex construction process is kind of hindering it and not allowing for this demand to be released, feels like.
Yeah, I mean, and they are if you go back through the reports that are done about the state of productivity in the industry and what's the strategy, whether you go back through, construction playbook as it is now, modernize or die, Egan, Latham, those themes are consistent all the way through. Behaviours in the industry, in the way that trade contractors, specialist contractors get treated, the reliance on the design and dump model with contractors, hold-ups in planning, those things are consistent all the way through. And now we exacerbate that with the fact that we're not propped up by the baby boom workforce
Like
and management that were there, because we just haven't got the people to deliver. So combine that with obviously the way that Brexit has affected availability of workforce as well. Yeah, we sort of move into that perfect storm of stuff, combined with material prices. God knows what happens if another ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal. Material prices go up again. We have real problem. And it's some of the things that have informed my view of what I do next. It's why I'm excited about this timber company, because they've absolutely identified that homegrown timber can deliver low-rise housing. And you can do this by a disaggregated network of the joinery firms that are already out there. Get them to deliver the componentry locally, but to a ruthlessly well-designed, standardized, panelized hybrid system. And you have the benefit, you have the basis of being able to deliver to the localities without any of the issues as regards wider scale logistics, shipping air, trying to keep throughput in a factory. You can deliver panels to stock, all of these sorts of things that can work as part of it. And would really love to come back in 12 months and have the discussion with you to see whether I've actually delivered on what I've sort of set out there. But it won't be me, promise me. It'll be the other guys in the company. But I'd be love to be held to account by you guys on whether it's actually worked.
Let's see then. Let's see.
So just wanted to...
just wanted to build on your earlier point about investors looking at the offsite. So we spoke with investors who actively invest in construction technology, like vertically focused investors. And what they say, they don't like offsite and they don't like MMC and none of those stuff, because it's an asset heavy business model. So like you said, if this is like a ministry contract where you can see 4-year window for a purchase of these units or projects, then that's brilliant. But unfortunately, there's no demand from this point of view, right? From this kind of secured and certain business coming for the offsite factories. So building on this, I just wanted to ask like a very broad question about, and also connect what you said about the Bristol scheme in case of Modulus, that the first one never going to be profitable, right? What is offsite manufacturing for? If it's in my head, if you can't build it cheaper, why would I do it?
So I think you have to look at the people that have been successful in the way that they've approached it at the moment. Tide Vision seem to have made a very good business out of delivering what would be quite, very complex buildings. But I think they were clever in identifying how they could be vertically integrated. So because they were taking development risk as well as construction risk, they were able to control to a degree the demand and then how that would affect themselves in terms of design and construction. And obviously that's what some of the other players attempted to do as well. They just weren't as successful in controlling the demand. They were still reliant on external parties to deliver some of the demand to the factory. So I think you have to be ruthless on that. And it'll be interesting to see where some of those build to rent operators go in that space, if they can be ruthless in standardizing what their approach is going to be to a site and then manage that, as you say, in a vertically integrated way. There is every reason why they can be successful in delivering that at the right sort of scale. And again, I think it's horses for courses, but you have to have that standardization. You have to have that control of demand in order to do it. Then if you've got the right sort of numbers, then probably the investment in the heavy capex will work. But again, you're still always going to be reliant with the range of stuff. that's out there on other elements of the supply chain to be able to provide what you need. So you still need to fall back on some of those trusted names, whether it's Knauf, Cineat, or British Gypsum for plasterboard in the UK, whether it's Intrastack for light gauge steel, other brands are available, all of that sort of stuff. You still have to rely on those people to provide to you. So it's about how you structure those relationships and partnerships to deliver. And it may be that you're not, your factory is just that localized assembly plant. And I still passionately believe that that is going to be a better way to deliver than setting up a huge factory, which comes with a lot of other attendant problems as well. But that may be just my internal bias on it.
Yeah, I would agree actually with this point of view as well. Having localized instead of one giant and then distributing through the whole country.
Yeah, because as we all know, UK roads are not the best.
Well, I think they are not bad actually.
Well, I mean,
coming from Eastern Europe, I can tell you.
Okay, I'll bow to your superior knowledge of the road networks of Europe. I would just say that having just recently driven in France, it was a quantum world of difference. So yeah, but I we can be down on this country. I think. Oh, sorry, certainly English can. There are some amazing companies out there that do. We are without doubt one of the best design engineering entities in the world in terms of what we can do. And it's about giving those people enough time to do the stuff. If we change some of the behaviors in the contracting models, use more of the specialist engineers that are out there, whether it's groundworks, whether it's structures, facades, interiors, timber framing, whoever it is, use that expertise. We can absolutely transform how we deliver in this country, and I think you can put together models there that would absolutely be investable if the demand is proven. And that's really would be my clear challenge to the incoming government of whatever flavour it is you've got to be able to create and stimulate that. If you do that, then we can have a really good chance of doing this, because we have the talent in this country to be able to do it.
Well, thanks to Martin coming here and bolstering our workforce.
You're welcome.
Chris, one last question to close this out.
Let's build England together.
Obviously United Kingdom, just to be clear.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I'm as guilty of it.
So, Chris, the final question then. If there was one country on Earth that you could drive and experience the roads, where would it be? No, just kidding.
Poland. And why is it Poland?
Just kidding. So, where does the future lie for you? I'm interested. Obviously, you had a little bit of a spanner in the works for use of a construction analogy. Where does it go?
So obviously I'm hoping this is a launch into media for me. Through
Anytime.
Going on your esteemed podcast. But no. So I'm enthused by what we might be able to achieve with the timber product in terms of absolutely. So I'm a director alongside 4 other people in that. So, but that is again pre-income producing, although we got the first project coming through now. So there's that. I'm helping a management consultancy who specialize. They've come mainly from other backgrounds, actually, in manufacturing, and we're exploring what could be done in this space. So to build on a lot of the things that we've discussed today about the challenges, but how do you help organizations do that? So that's again exciting for me because it's putting in a lot of a play. But in fairness, I do need to earn some money day to day because these are longer term investment things on my behalf. So I am still looking around for some, I suppose, development management or construction management opportunities for 2, 3, or 4 days a week to basically keep some income. But what it's enabled me to do is this period, albeit a setback with it happening in the way that it did, and a few of us trying to rescue a few things out of it, was actually take a step back and say, what is it that interests me? And that for me is always the thing in real estate. And I think it's why, you guys are able to build something like that you do with Bricks and Bytes, because it's such an interesting industry, and you meet really engaging, interested people, and there's always a variety. If the education sector is booming, you get to work on that. And I loved working on education because you could see the difference you made by delivering those facilities from what was there beforehand to an environment that children and staff actually cared about, and could actually better improve outcomes, partly because of the environment they're in, not solely, of course. But at the same time, some people get buoyed by contributing to bottom line, as we see in data centers at the moment, which has gone absolutely mental in terms of that sort of side of it. So it's the sheer variety of stuff. I have a passion about education and residential because I think they produce better outcomes for society. And I suppose I'm at that stage in my career where I still love the fact that you can drive past something. I was lucky enough to be involved in a REBA Sterling Prize award-winning school with Alfred Hall, Monaghan Morris. I was the commissioning director for it. So every time I drive past Aylesfield Road, in Aylesfield, past Burntwood Lane, Burntwood School is there, and it still looks as good as it when it was delivered. And that's a testimony to the school as a client, Wandsworth as a client, and the brief they set us, but really the execution of Lend-Lease and AHMM at that time.
Very good. Okay, Chris. Thank you for joining us. Could you tell people where they could find out more about you?
So my profile's on LinkedIn, and from there'll be links to Elsie, the company I'm involved with. There'll be some upcoming links to Total Flow, the consultancy I work with, but absolutely happy to discuss opportunities with people around any of those sort of things we've discussed, and happily share any experience that I've come across. So again, Owen and Martin, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. That was very educational.